Guardians. Today we're delving into the world of PvE content in Destiny 2, focusing on the top 7 Titan builds that will equip you to triumph over any challenge the game's PvE encounters throw your way. As Titans, we're the vanguard of strength and resilience, and with these meticulously crafted builds, you'll be able to unleash devastating power upon your enemies while standing unyielding against their assaults. From decimating hordes of foes with unparalleled offensive capabilities to providing crucial support to your fire team, these builds are tailored to excel in every PvE scenario Destiny 2 has to offer. So rally your fellow Guardians, prepare your arsenal, and join us as we explore the top 7 Titan builds designed to dominate PvE content in Destiny 2. Remember to leave a like if you find this video helpful, and if you like seeing build videos and other Destiny 2 helpful content, hit that subscribe button. With that being said, let's jump right on into it. The first build we're going to be looking at is one of the strongest all around, and that is the Strand Wormgod build. Strand Titan stands out as one of the best builds for 3 reasons: high survivability, high ability damage, and high ad clearing potential. This build takes advantage of Strand's super strong woven mail that grants an extra 45% damage resistance. With Threat of Warding, we gain woven mail whenever we pick up an orb of power, so we pair that with mods like Heavy Handed and Siphon mods to create mass amounts of orbs. This high damage resistance means we take less damage, but not only that, we pair it with Banner of War to gain stacks of healing after we get a melee kill or a finisher. And since we have such high damage resistance and healing, we can play aggressive with a grapple melee and our Frenzy Blade. So we pair that with Wormgod Caress to gain stacking melee damage up to 275%, meaning that we can one-shot any target and deal massive damage to bosses. We then add in the Aspect into the fray to gain increased melee regen whenever we have woven mail, Thread of Generation for increased grenade regeneration, and mods that will give back ability energy so that we have high uptime with all of our abilities, leading to massive damage and ad clearing. So what's the flow for this build? It's pretty simple: melee or finish a target to trigger Banner of War for healing and Wormgod for increased damage. Keep meleeing and grapple meleeing everything in sight to keep up your damage. If you run out of ability energy, use your weapons to generate more grenade energy, and while Wormgod is active, you'll have increased weapon damage. There are a few weapons that really help this build become even stronger. The first being the Navigator. This allows you to put down a grapple point and have infinite grapple melee. This works in ad dense rooms or for boss phases. Many people have done 1 phases solo just with grapple melee alone because of this. You can also take a 1-2 punch shotgun, so this will amp up your melee damage to the next level, and this is super important for dealing even more damage to bosses. Or you can pair it with trusty old Tractor Cannon, which is an easy to use weapon and gives you and your team extra damage with weaken. Weapons with Pugilist or like the Monte Carlo are fantastic for having really high uptime with your melee. This build excels in almost all content. It can be tricky to stay up close and personal in GMs, but in all other content, this is amazing since it's so hard to die and so easy to kill. The second build we're taking a look at is the Solar Bonk Titan build. This is the new version of the Bonk Titan build. With Wormgod's Caress, we can increase our melee damage buff past what Synthoceps has to offer. We pair that with Solar's Infinite Throwing Hammer to kill everything in sight and give ourselves Restoration for increased healing and survivability. We use the Aspect Roaring Flames to increase our ability damage, making our hammer super strong when paired with Wormgod. And the Aspect Soul Invictus creates sunspots whenever we do get solar ability kills. So that'll give us easy access to restoration and deal more damage to enemies. In easy content, you can run with Solar Grenade for extra damage and ad clear. And in harder content, you can run with the Healing Grenade so that you have on-demand healing and that you can go into every engagement with restoration already active. So what's the flow for this build? Well, as we build up our Wormgod damage stacks, we also gain Radiant with Ember of Torches for extra weapon damage. Once we have Restoration and Radiant, we can use our weapons or our abilities to extend their duration with Ember of Empyrean, meaning we can have infinite uptime as long as there's ads to kill. And pro tip, if you have Roaring Flames active, your regular melee counts as a powered melee, meaning that you can scorch targets when you melee, and when you kill them, you'll get your hammer back even quicker with Ember of Searing. The best ways to improve this build are to bring solar weapons. Solar weapons excel in a build like this since it's able to extend our Restoration and Radiant, as well as deal extra damage with Weapon Surge mods. We also pair that with Harmonic Siphon and Heavy Handed to generate orbs with both our weapons and our melee. We bring a solar primary with Incandescent for extra scorch and ignitions, and a solar heavy so that our primary and heavy will both deal increased damage. And if you don't mind the hot swap, you can hot swap out to Pyrogale Gauntlets during a damage phase and pop your super to deal some of the highest DPS possible with a Titan super. So where does this build excel? Well, I love it for solo content, raids, and dungeons. It has easy to access restoration and incredible DPS, meaning it's easy to stay alive and melt bosses. And for our third build, we'll actually be playing off of our last build and have an alternative alternative build that requires no hot swapping and overall is a bit more beginner friendly with the Synthoceps Solar Titan build. Since you don't have to worry about keeping up stacks of Worm God for extra damage or not being able to hit a flying boss with your Burning Maul super, this build is solid in any activity. All you have to do is jump into a group of enemies and bam, you have an incredibly strong melee. Since it's so easy to activate, you don't get as much damage as Worm God, which is why I like Worm God specifically for dealing more damage. But with Synthoceps, it'll still be easy to basically one-shot almost any enemy in most content. We will take advantage of almost all of the same fragments, mods, weapons that gave our build so much strength, with the main difference being how you play and your super. Since our Hammer of Soul isn't a one and done super, we can use it for ad clear or for damage phases. If we're still surrounded when we go into a damage phase, we can output upwards of over 1 million damage because of Synthoceps, which is going to give us really good heavy ammo economy, meaning we can take weapons like rockets for ammo dumping and swap out our heavy ammo finder mods for hands-on so that we get back our super even quicker, just in case we need to pop it before a damage phase. This build also excels solo because of how much healing we get. The main difference is how we can go mind numb with this build because of how easy it is. It doesn't matter who or what enemies you're facing. You'll be dealing massive damage and staying alive. For our fourth build, we're taking a look at the Arc Titan Hoyle build. Arc Titan Hoyle is really what makes me love a game like Destiny. This build is the Grenadier build. Arc has access to Ionic Traces, which give back 12% to all of our abilities, which pairs perfectly with Hoyle since it encourages us to use all of our abilities consistently. When we use one ability, it powers up the other two, giving up to 2 stacks of increased damage and ability regeneration. Since Hoyle gives up to an 800% increase to our ability regeneration, we'll take advantage of Touch of Thunder so that our grenades deal more damage and more importantly create Ionic Traces. Spark of Ions, Magnitude, and Shock will also be used so that now they last longer, jolt targets, and create more Ionic Traces, which leads to us having a nuke in our back pocket that will melt any target while spreading damage from jolt and creating a ton of Ionic Traces, giving us back even more ability energy. We then pair that with mods to create orbs on grenade kills and weapon kills. We then use our thruster since it gives us easier movement and mainly because it has a shorter cooldown. And this makes it easy to pair with powerful attraction so that we can pick up any nearby orbs around us. Now that orbs are so easy to pick up, we can take mods that will give us back more ability energy, which really puts this build over the top since it feels like as long as you hit your abilities, you'll almost immediately get them back. So what's the flow for this build? Well, you can try to min-max by using your thrusters, then your melee, then your grenade for the most damage. But in reality, you get back your abilities so quickly, it's not really necessary. We have Spark of Resistance so that we take less damage when we're surrounded, so that we can use the Aspect Knockout to start health regen on a melee kill. And this allows the build to be pretty aggressive, since you almost always want to be next to an enemy so that you can heal. Our abilities take the reins, meaning that we can have more free reign when it comes to our weapons. And for our weapons, we can take disorienting grenade launchers to make it easier to get up close and personal without dying. You can also take weapons with Volt Shot, which leads to even more Ionic Traces and more ad clearing potential. And since we use our grenade so much, weapons with Demo make it easy to reload and give us more grenade energy. So where does this build excel? Well, it excels in most team content. It is a bit harder to stay alive since we have to actively heal ourselves with a melee. The amount of ad clearing potential and how strong Thunder Crash is means that when it comes to raids and dungeons, it stands out in most content. For our fifth build, we're taking a look at the Stasis Icefall Mantle build. Stasis feels the strongest when using weapons and smashing crystals. Because of that, we aim to have increased weapon damage and freeze any target in sight. Icefall Mantle is the missing key to Stasis, since all of our other classes have access to more and easier to use healing. With your on-demand overshield, you can give yourself a moment to heal while taking a whopping 62% less damage, which can also stack with Whisper of Chains, which is going to give you another 40% damage resistance when you're near a frozen target or a crystal. Like I said, we aim to freeze everything and create as many crystals as possible, which is why we're taking Whisper of Shards for an increased 500% grenade recharge rate so that we can create crystals more often with our Glacier Grenade. Adding in Diamond Lance means that we can easily freeze any target or deal more AoE damage, and Whisper of Fissures makes it so that all of our shatter damage will deal more damage and have an increased area of effect. Since we can create so many crystals, we can add in the aspect Tectonic like Harvest, and fragments Whisper of Rhyme and Conduction, so that our crystals will now drop shards when they're shattered, and those shards will track to us, giving us more health and overshield, as well as a bump to our melee energy. While it is a ton of fun creating and shattering crystals, the beauty really comes from our weapons. As we kill with our stasis weapons, we gain stacking damage that's increased up to 25%, which is more than weapon search mods can provide. Alternatively, you can pop your barricade to activate the max stacks of your weapon surge. This gives the best of both worlds, more abilities with increased weapon damage and a way to heal on demand. When you're looking at weapons to pair with this build, it pairs best with a stasis primary, and mainly one that has headstone, so that precision kills will create crystals, and that just feeds back into our build. Verglass Curve is a bow that when you get kills while aiming down sights, it starts to stack up and build a charge so that when you shoot from the hip, you'll create up to 5 crystals. So you can basically have 2 grenades to use whenever you want. There aren't a ton of stasis heavy weapons that can compete, but since we do get 25% weapon damage, we do have Cold Comfort, which is already one of the best rockets available. This build excels in team content. Stasis is very close to being back in the meta, and if the final shape brings more stasis buffs, this build could be one of my most used builds. It does lack a little bit in survivability, so I wouldn't really recommend it for solo content. For our 6th build, we have the Void Doomfang build, and this build is massive weapon damage and is good in most activities. Doomfang is the Void version of the Stasis Icefall Mantle. We gain increased 25% weapon damage from Void weapon kills or with a powered melee kill. This build will revolve more around using your weapons to trigger Void explosions. Graviton Lance will be our main weapon, since by itself it's strong, but we use Echo of Instability, Echo of Undermining, and Echo of Remnants to have our grenades weaken targets, last longer, and give volatile rounds to our weapons. These volatile rounds, plus Graviton's intrinsic ability to cause explosions, and an increased 25% damage, means that our weapon will melt through waves of enemies. We then add in Devour that we get from picking up orbs to gain more health and grenade energy whenever we kill. This will help accelerate the process, meaning that we can repeat it over and over again. Meanwhile, we have an incredible wombo combo of Bastion to gain overshield from barricades and Offensive Bulwark to gain increased grenade recharge while we have an overshield, so that we can gain more survivability and more damage potential. That's the core of the build. We use mods to gain more orbs and orbs to gain more ability energy, which makes this build super fun and easy to use since it's so weapon focused. When we talk about improving the build, we mainly want to take Graviton Lance since how strong it is in both solo and multi-target scenarios. And since we have increased Void weapon damage, we want to take a Void Heavy. Regnant is a good grenade launcher for DPS phases. You could also take a Void Machine Gun, since it's fantastic for ad clearing and dealing decent damage in damage phases. This build excels in scenarios when you don't want to get up close and personal. Graviton Lance has excellent range, so you can stay back and pick off your enemies. When Void Surge is active, I almost always pick this build. And finally, we have my GM build. That's right, this is basically my one-stop shop for any GM. While all of these previous builds are fantastic in most content, they all have one thing in common, being that if you can't kill quickly, you start to lose the power of your build, and most require you to be up close and personal. This means they can be hard to use in GMs. So I have a build that's basically a one-stop shop for any GM, and that is the Abiant Leap Suspend build. I actually stray away from the meta for my Abiant Leap build. I like to take Banner of War and Dranger's Lash. That way I can send out 3 suspending waves with my barricade, but also we get the healing benefit from Banner. We of course are going to be taking the Shackle Grenade so that we can have another way to suspend targets. And since we gain Woven Mail by suspending targets, we want to suspend everything. So then we take Thread of Generation to consistently gain more grenade energy, and Thread of Wisdom, Mind, and Continuity so that we can create orbs and gain more class ability energy by killing suspended targets. And our targets are going to stay suspended longer. So what's the flow for this build? Since it is for GMs, we want to stay pretty far back. If a target gets too close, we can use our Barricade or Shackle Grenade to suspend those targets, which also gives you the opportunity to get a free finisher or melee to proc your banner for healing. We will be taking Wish Ender since it absolutely claps in GMs. Not to mention that you now have access to barrier and unstoppable champions with just your bow and suspend. Your bow will be your primary source for damage, so we'll take at least 1 kinetic weapon surge. And since you can create orbs by killing suspended targets, getting melee kills, or weapon kills, this should be active fairly often. Use your bow as your main source and kill everything. Suspend any and all troublesome targets. And you can pop your barricade to res a teammate if you need to. And since your bow is so strong, you can take an overload weapon as a secondary if needed, or you can take a utility weapon like a waveframe grenade launcher or a blinding grenade launcher. Rockets and linears are your best option for DPS, but it mainly depends on the boss. And worst case scenario, you can cheese some bosses by staying very far back and chipping away with Wishender. Like I said, this is my one-stop shop build for GMs. Suspend will help keep ads under control, and Wishender melts enemies and GMs, while giving you the ability to stun any and all champs without losing out on any damage. And there you have it, Guardians. We've covered the top 7 Titan builds for PvE content in Destiny 2, each one meticulously crafted to empower you in your journey. Remember, mastering these builds is only the beginning. Experiment with different combinations, tweak your loadouts to suit your playstyle, and never stop honing your skills. Whether you're tackling raids, strikes, or challenging activities, these builds will serve you as a steadfast companion, ensuring that you will emerge victorious against any foe that dare stand in your way. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more Destiny 2 content, and share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Together, we'll continue to forge our legend in the world of Destiny 2. Keep an eye out for future videos as we continue to explore the ever-evolving world of Destiny 2. Until then, may the threads of fate be ever in your favor. This is Lucky Mech, signing off. See you on the next adventure, Guardians.